session 8 in the AICT sponsored short-term training program on IoT and advanced power electronics applications in smart grid. Today we have Dr. Aidappu Mahesh from the SVNIT Surat. He is going to deliver the session on the optimal sizing of the hybrid renewable energy systems. I would like to call Ms. Nehal Sagre, madam, to kindly introduce our today's guest.
Good afternoon, everyone. Moving on to the next session of the day 4. Topic for the session is optimal sizing and energy management in hybrid renewable energy. Dr. E. Mahesh sir has completed his master's degree in electrical engineering with the specialization in power electronics and electric drives from PEC University of Technology, Chandigarh. In 2012, he completed his PhD on optimal sizing and energy management strategies for hybrid renewable energy systems from NIT Kurukshetra in 2018. He was working as an assistant professor at Sharda University from 2012 to 2013. He has also worked as an assistant professor at NIT Kurukshetra, and currently he is working as an assistant professor at Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel National Institute of Technology, Surat. His areas of interest are hybrid renewable energy systems, evolutionary optimization techniques, power electronics, and drives. He has published many research papers, journal papers, and presented at international, national, and international conferences. Sir has been actively participated in many of the academic contributions, and he is reviewer for many of the reputed journals and also a senior member in IEEE. We are honored to have you, sir. Now I request you, sir, to start with the session.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. So, as I exactly don't know what are the participants' level, I try to keep it simple. So, can you tell me what are the major participants are from which, like whether they are master students or faculty?
Sir, they are mix of all the categories. So there are some UG students also, but majority are academicians. There are some people who have joined from industry also.
Yeah, fine.
So it's a mix of all.
Okay, then in that case, I'll try to keep it to basics. I mean, anyhow, my topic is very easy to understand. So I'll try to keep it to simple, as easy as possible. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Oh. As the introduction, you know that my topic was optimal sizing and energy management was there, but I thought it will be a very big presentation. So it is difficult for me to cover all the things. So I put optimal sizing as a topic for today's session. So let us move in. So as an introduction, just in a few minutes, we'll try to understand what is a renewable energy and what are its implications. So as you all know, renewable energy is any sustainable energy source that comes from natural environment. That is more important, that the renewable energy should not come from any processed thing. It should come from natural environment. That is more important here, so that we don't damage the environment, right? And some of the aspects here is it exists perpetually and in abundant. This is also one of the important point. Abundant means it should be there in abundant in nature, so that it will serve all our energy requirements. So, and it exists perpetually means it should be naturally there. It should not be, you should not be doing any processing to get it out, and it should be ready to be harnessed, and it should be inexhaustible. And again, it is a clean alternative to fossil fuels. So these are the things which we would expect from a renewable energy source. And obviously, we knew that the fossil fuels are naturally diminishing, and obviously we all know that we'll be seeing our some of the oil and petrol, the oil and our coal in museums. Maybe after 100 years, people will definitely see. People used to use these kind of things in previous generations for the energy requirements, right? So they'll be only visible in museums. So naturally, since they are diminishing, so we would definitely have to look for a sustainable source. That is more important, that it should be a sustainable. That means it should not be exhausted. It should be sustainable source. So it should be available for our future generations, right? So this data I have taken from the Power Ministry website. So at present the scenario is like this. So we have total energy is about 371 gigawatts, and out of which obviously most majority of the part which still now comes from the coal, and lignite is also part of coal only. And again, gas, diesel, these are all again the first four are non-conventional energy sources. And we have hydro, this is kind of a renewable only, and you have pure actual renewable including all other sources is about 88 gigawatts. Okay. And out of the renewable sources, as on again, this is a ministry data taken from MNRE website. So as of 31st July, we have this data. So you can see here we have wind power, solar power of 35 gigawatts, wind power of 37 gigawatts, bio, small hydro and waste to power are this much. And I made a similar graph on 2017. So it is to my surprise, I could see in 2018 I made it again, 2019 I made it again. So if I see the graph of how the things are improving, so that makes a huge impact. I mean, we can see how rapidly we are moving towards the solar power. In that sense, even wind power also there is some addition, but the major chunk of improvement which came in the solar power only, right? So here in 2017 or 16, if I remember, the solar power was only 4 gigawatt, and in 2017 it became about 9 or 10. Later it became about 20. Now as on date it became 35. So you can see there is a rapid growth in the solar power in India. Since we are a solar nation, solar power is available abundantly in this our country. So you can see there is a huge improvement in the solar here. So these are all some basic statistics here. We have the fifth largest power generation portfolio, about 372 gigawatts, and current renewable energy contribution is about 88 out of this 372 gigawatts. And wind energy is currently the largest, and obviously in maybe few months only, solar is going to take over as the largest renewable energy sources in India. And the government, as for the government perspective is concerned, the government announced the Jawaharlal Nehru National Solar Mission in 2011, and at the time the target was only 20 gigawatt, and it was revised in 2015 to 100 gigawatts. So that indicates that government's interest in the renewable energy systems and government's future direction. You can understand that how rapidly the government is planning to invest and interested in developing the solar energy. And obviously they are giving us these incentives for installing the solar power, and they are giving us capital subsidies, interest subsidy, viability gap funding. So these are all the government, this shows that the interest of the government, I mean, it's not only the interest of the researchers, and it is obviously the interest of the government. So any research or anything which you are going to do in this area will attract a large funding from funding agencies and funding from the government as well. That's what is my motivation behind keeping this slide. And what was the aim was to promote the use of solar energy for power generation and other uses, with ultimate objective of making solar energy compete with fossil fuel. So this is one of the major bottleneck in the solar technology today, that because of the high investment cost, even though the fuel or the source which is free, some sunlight is naturally available, but still the initial investment is still high. So that is the reason that the people are still not interested in going for solar, because you can see the unit rate, it used to be about maybe 5 rupees, 7 rupees in previous days, but nowadays they become more cost competitive. So you can see I have seen tenders where the unit cost was quoted about 3 to 3.5 rupees. So that thing only possible when the government is giving us subsidies. So if there is no subsidy from the government side, so even the per unit cost is going to be so high, right? So so that is what is the main aim, is to compete the the solar energy with the fossil based energy. So nowadays at the home, people are sometimes, for low income group people, they'll be getting at 2 rupees, maybe 1.5 rupees as well. So if you're able to compete that your solar energy prices with the fossil based energy, then definitely people will prefer to go for solar energy in the coming days to come. And again, Solar Mission aims to reduce the cost of solar power generation through long-term policy, large-scale deployment, and aggressive R&D and domestic production of critical raw material. This is again one of the area that where you can see that you are importing all the required materials from foreign countries. So that is a dependency. Naturally, once we are importing some things, they'll be adding additional charge. They'll be putting taxes on it, they'll be taking profit, so naturally the cost of the things are going to improve. So if you are able to develop the technology domestically, then definitely the costs are going to come really down, and that is going to help in promoting the solar energy in the large sense. And you can see the wind prices have fallen dramatically due to the innovations in technology, increasing manufacturing scale. Again, when you go for large scale manufacturing, the cost obviously going to reduce. And even prices for solar modules were declined almost 80% since 2008, and wind prices have been declined more than 25% since 2008. So that is a good sign that the prices are decreasing. So once prices are decreasing, obviously people are going to utilize this energy as a source for their future energy requirements. And now why we are talking about these, since we have potential, like the energy potential in India is huge. So you can see about 1 or 2.8 gigawatts of estimated energy potential of wind we have, and out of which we are currently using about for 38 gigawatts. So there is still enough potential for us to grow in the wind terms. And small hydro, we are about 19.7 we have, and for presently we are generating at 4.71. And bio again 22.5 is estimated, we are at 9.93. And here you can see the solar energy potential is huge. It is 748.98 gigawatt. That means even the entire nation, two same nations can be powered, same size of nations can be powered, because we are having about 370 gigawatts as a portfolio. Now you can see it is almost near to double the potential we have, but we are only able to tap up to 38 gigawatts. So that means we have huge potential in this place, because in our country it's abundantly solar energy is available. Even the southern parts and the mid part where currently we are, the solar energy is obviously available in the winters as well. So it might be in the north places, in some areas it might be not be available that much in the winter, but most of the places in India you have enough potential to install the PV plants. So and now these are all the benefits. Now what are the problems? Obviously the major problem here is this unpredictable nature. So it is not predictable, since it is dependent clearly on the climatic conditions, and when there is sunlight there is a power generation, when there is no sunlight or when there is no wind there is no power, right? So that means there is no reliability. That means you cannot 100% say that in tomorrow at 12 o'clock you will be generating this much power, or at 12 o'clock you will be having power or not, you don't know, because at 12 o'clock there may be cloud, there may be wind, there may be no wind, there may be rain. So you never know that at what time you are going to generate how much. So to some extent you can estimate by using the weather data and forecasting, but that still cannot account for the dynamic nature, because after half an hour you might get a rain, so that you cannot predict by using your the forecasting, right? And due to this, obviously we'll be requiring a high storage. So because since this kind of situation is existing, we definitely have to have some backup. So that will cost us in terms of storage. So we have to have a battery bank so that you can complement when there is no, in the night, if there is solar, there is no solar radiation available, we can go for battery. So, and once the battery comes into picture, that is going to increase the cost of system a lot, because battery is one of the most fragile or most weak component in the entire system. Because solar panels, there is no moving parts, there is no, mostly they will not be damaged so easily. So naturally the lifetime of a solar panel is up to about, you can say it is about 20 to 25 years. and all other components, inverters and all, they are having fairly good lifetime, and the battery is the only thing which needs a frequent replacement and maintenance, right? So you have a battery in your car, you have battery in your vehicles, so naturally they'll be have to be replaced about 3 years or 4 years time. And even though if you go for a very good company, maybe in 5 years definitely you are supposed to replace. So that will cost, that will add enough cost to your system, and overall due to that you can see per unit generation cost is increasing, high per unit cost, even though the fuel is free. So even though there is no fuel requirement, but the per unit generation cost is still high because of all these factors. So now what is the solution is, these problems can be reduced to some extent by combining 2 or more such resources, right? If there is a possibility of combining multiple resources together, so that will avoid the requirement of storage, right? I mean 100% it is not possible, definitely to some extent definitely the storage can be, requirements can be reduced. So by combining, let's say, solar and wind, you can see, and the daytime solar is available, in the evening and the nights you will be getting more wind. So naturally you will be getting the benefit, they will be complementary characteristics. So they both are complement in nature. So they can complement each other. So when in the night time wind might support, and in the daytime solar may be supporting, or in the sunny day solar will be helping, and in the windy or rainy day you will be helping with the wind energy, right? So by complement, this is a very good pair where combining these two resources can allow us to reduce our storage requirement naturally, because we don't need that much storage, so we might be needing very less storage, and that will also reduce our cost per unit, obviously, because of the storage, right? We are reducing storage, so that part is gone, so obviously we are going to improve upon the cost sense. Now there are again two types of hybrid systems possible. One is a standalone system, and next one is your grid connected system. So in a standalone system, general schematic is something like this. We have a wind turbine here, we have a PV module here, and the entire PV power generated comes into a common controller. So that will be a DC bus, you can say. So from there some power goes to battery depending on the load conditions. So if the load is less than the power available, then the remaining energy is going to go into the battery. If the load is more than what is your power requirement, then the battery will be supplying that power. So if the generated power is less than the load, then the battery will supply the power. If the generated power is more than the load, then the excess power is going to go to battery. So there is AC load and there is DC load. I don't know, but some places you might have a DC load as well. So depending on the type of connection you have, you can go for a DC load as well. And there is one additional load which is called as a dump load, so which must be there in a standalone system, because let's say there is a case possible when we have excess of power, the load is low, and you are having power generation and the battery is also fully charged. So in that case, there must be, the power must be dumped somewhere, because the power is already being generated. So that power should go somewhere. So that power is going to go to this dump load. So dump load, usually a resistor, it may be used to dissipate the energy in the form of heat, and instead of wasting that heat, you can use it as a water heater, you can use it for some other storage purposes. So that can be utilized. Even that heat what you are generating can be used for, you can go for even a combination of fuel cell system, where you can generate hydrogen with the heat, and you can go for some other system with that heat, or you can simply, if it is a very small system, that can be used for a water heater purpose in a home. So you can get a hot water from that dump load. As a dump load, you can use a water heater. And now naturally, if you go for a grid connected system, what is going to happen? You have PV, again DC-DC, again used for your MPPT control, and AC-DC wind, you are generating AC from the wind power, you will convert it back into deep DC, and we have a battery, and that is going to be again a DC-DC converter to bring everything into a common DC bus level, same voltage, so that all can be connected parallelly. And then you have a DC-AC converter or the inverter, so that will give us the power, AC power output, and that is given to a transformer, then it is given to a grid. And from the grid you can take a load, or you can supply the load from here only directly at the input of the transformer itself, depending on the configuration how you would like to work with. And this is one of the configuration. And you have a AC bus system also, so you can make AC or convert everything into AC and bring them into common level and join here. You have individual inverters and then directly connected to a transformer. That is also possible. It is a AC bus system. So it is all up to the policy planner which thing will be more suitable. You can decide based on the system. And now let us come into our topic, which is optimal sizing. So since these are completely location specific, the hybrid systems must be properly sized, right? So that means what? It's not that we have some land available and we'll go for 10 kilowatt of PV, 10 kilowatt of wind, and we just combine together and we'll get the output, or we'll go for so many ampere hour battery, right? So there must be some rationality, there must be some method to calculate the sizes, right? You cannot simply put whatever the size of the system you would like, you cannot put it, right? So there must be some method so that you will get the cost benefit. You can get the minimum cost depending on the local meteorological conditions and depending on the loading condition, up to what extent you are going to load. And depending on all those things, you can perform a calculation, or you say a method you can devise. So that method can be called as a size optimization, right? And how the size optimization is performed by, you can model all the systems based on their characteristics, and once you have a model, then you can develop those models in a program, and then you can put them in a part of optimization problem, and then you can perform the optimization, right? So now let us try to understand the models, how the PV panel is modeled, how the wind is modeled, how battery are modeled, and how the optimization is carried out. So I'll just quickly move through these basics. So most of you might be familiar with the PV system, how it works. So it is a NP-PN layer semiconductor material. It's a basically photo semiconductor material, where once the light falls onto the semiconductor N layer, that is going to emit the electrons, right? So it will absorb the photons and emit the electrons. So those electrons, once we collect at the terminals, that will form the current, right, basically. So it is a very simple explanation of our PV panel operation. And if you see the excuse me. So if you see the model of a PV cell, you have a ideal PV cell and you have a practical PV. So ideal means what? So the light energy is going to be converted into current basically. So whatever the current you are getting, that is proportional to the irradiation value. So if you are having more irradiation, you are going to get more current. So based on that, you are going to have for a constant irradiation value, you are going to get a constant current. So that is modeled as a constant current source, that is IPV, which is proportional to the G irradiation value. And this diode is representation of this body diode, PN junction. It is represented as a diode here. And this RP, RS are modeled as the losses, whatever the losses we have the recombination of charge carriers loss, and we have the body losses. So these are all modeled in terms of a series and parallel resistances, and you can see the current I, whatever we are getting here, is a difference between IPV minus ID. So if you subtract ID minus IPV from IPV, you are going to get the output current, and some current which is flowing through here as well, you can neglect, or you can even include that as well. So you are going more or less, it will not be a proportional, it will be a proportional current only. So it will be just IPV minus ID is our main interest here. And these are the equations. So I equal to IPV minus, this is a diode current equation, and this is a current which is flowing through the shunt resistance. And VT is a thermal voltage, and IPV, how to get, as I told you, it is proportional to the irradiation value G by, this is a nominal value of irradiation. So if you just for a minute, if you forget about this term, so you can see G by Gn into IP1. So nominal PV current into, this is a proportion. Let's say Gn is 1000 watt per meter square. At present we have 500, so this will be generating half of the current. So we have 200, it will be generating 20% of the current. So approximately it is just a proportional relationship only. And we have I naught again here, the I naught, these are all diode equations only. They are not, there is nothing much here. These are all standard equations you can find in any general standard journal paper. You can find all these equations. So you have IPV, as I told you, it is a constant current, and you can remember the diode forward biased characteristic here. So if you just subtract IB minus IPV, you can get the IV characteristic like this. So you can just subtract these two waveforms together from the straight line. If you subtract this in this one, you are going to get this characteristic. So that's how we get our IV characteristic of a PV cell. And again, in the IV characteristics, we would like to see this is a point where we have a maximum current, that is a short circuit current, and this is where we are going to get maximum voltage, and this is a point where you are going to get the maximum power. So if you see the this is the power curve, P versus V curve, just multiply I and V together, so you can get the power curve something like this. So this power where we are getting the maximum power, that is going to be corresponding to this point, which is going to be called as a maximum power point. And if you see the effect of temperature, so you can see as you increase the temperature, increase in temperature is going to cause more mobility in electrons. So there will be slight increase in current here in the short circuit current, but you can see there is a drastic decrement in the voltage. So that means what, temperature is not a friend of our PV panel. So there is a common misconception among many people that more temperature will give us more output. So it's not the case. If you go for more temperature, the PV output is going to reduce. It's not going to increase. It's only the light. We need more sunlight. It's not the temperature. So that means what, you can use PV panels in the very cold regions as well. You can go for Antarctica as well. There is minus temperature, but still you can get the PV output, as mostly the skies are clear in the Antarctica. Right, so you can, there is no pollution, there is nothing, so mostly clear skies, you can get enough sunlight. So sunlight is what is more important than the temperature. So the temperature is going to degrade the performance of the PV panel. And again, as I told you, this is a curve with respect to different irradiation values. So you can see, if you, as you increase the irradiation, so you can get more and more current here like this, in this manner. And naturally P versus V curve, if you see, so for different irradiation values, you can see for 0.4 you are going to get this much, 0.6, 0.8, and that means what, it is a per unit value. So this is 1000 watt per meter square. So if you are having 1000 watt per meter square irradiation, so that is going to be the maximum power you are going to get. And 0.8 you are going to get this much, 0.6, 0.4 like that. And even for the temperature effect, you can see, so naturally if you go for 0 degrees, you are going to get more power output. And you might get a doubt that negative temperatures might get even more, but there is a limitation. Obviously you cannot go beyond certain limit, but definitely there will be improvement in the performance, that I can guarantee. So 25 degrees you are going to get reduced power, and 50, 75, you can see as the temperature is increasing, the power whatever we are generating at the same irradiation value is going to decrease. So even though the irradiation is constant, the temperature is going to deteriorate the performance of a PV panel. And from this curve, you can see for a constant irradiation value, if you are operating your PV panel at different voltages, you are going to get different powers, right? So you can say if you are operating a PV panel at 10 volts, so you are going to get only 15 watts. And if you are operating, let's say for let's say rated radiation is available, and you are operating at 10 volts, you are going to get only about 35 to 40 watts. Instead of, it is possible to get 60 watts, but you are going to get only 35 to 40 because you are trying to operate your PV panel at 10 volts. So that means what, if you are able to change the operating point of a PV panel, if you force the PV panel to operate at this point, maximum power point, that means what, by some means, if you are able to control the current or voltage of a PV panel, since if you are controlling current means what, since they both are interrelated, you can see if you are changing the current here, naturally the voltage is also going to change, because once you are drawing different current from PV panel, the voltage generated by the PV panel is also going to change. So by changing the value of current, whatever you are drawing from the PV panel, you can operate your PV panel at maximum power point. So that method is called as a maximum power point tracking method. So there are different methods: hill climbing, incremental conductance, fuzzy logic, sliding mode. So there are other n number of methods we have. So I'm not going to get into much of the details here. So I'll just simply explain P&O algorithm. You can see, I think most of you might know it already. Still I'll just cover. So at the end of the output of a PV panel, you have VA, you have what you call DC-DC converter. Let me just open it again. Yeah, is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry for that. Let me just so let me just take, so at the end of a PV panel, you can see here. So if this is the, sorry, what is happening here? So let me just quickly explain to go for things. Have a DC-DC converter at the end of a in the input of a PV panel, right? So DC-DC converter, let us say if you assume it as a buck converter. So buck converter, it will be like if you are increasing the switching angle, the output voltage is going to increase. So voltage, so if you are able to control the voltage in that manner, so that means if you are changing the perturbation, means if you are changing the switching angle of the DC-DC converter, and if you are able to get a positive power out of it, so either depending on the converter you have, so if you are changing a perturbation, let us assume that you are increasing the voltage by changing the perturbation. So once the voltage is being increased, so if the change in power is positive, you are going to go still going to go upwards in this way. So you are going to go in the same direction. You should continue, increase the next perturbation, and the change in power is positive, then still you increase. So naturally you are going to go up the hill until this point. So at this point, if you change the perturbation, if you are getting a power negative, then obviously you are supposed to come back. So your next perturbation must be go back and do the operation. So similarly, if you are in the negative point, if you are changing it to positive, so then if you are in the correct direction, you go in the negative, or if you are on the negative side, change in power is negative, then next perturbation must be positive. So likewise, you are going to achieve the maximum power point by controlling the switching of the DC-DC converter, right? So this is just similar the flow chart of the same method what I explained. So this is a difference in power delta P, and if you see whether it is greater than 0 or less than 0, depending upon that you see voltage is greater than 0, less than 0, and depending upon that you are going to cause the voltage to decrease or increase by changing the switching angle of the DC-DC converter. So I hope this P and O method is one of the very simple method, and many of you might be already aware, and this is not exactly 100% part of what we study, right? So in our optimal sizing, we are not going to do any DC-DC converter, but we assume that there is a DC MPPT method is already in place, and we are getting the maximum power at every instant, right? Because the power optimal sizing strategy is a planning strategy. So it's not a dynamic study, but it is a steady state study. So we are not going to be worried about 10 watt change in power, 20 watts change in power, but we always assume that there is, if the maximum power point system is in place, and what will be the maximum power I'm going to get at this particular value of irradiation, right? So for that matter, we will be using a simplified model. So this is a detailed model. Whatever we were discussing is a detailed model. So that is mainly used for the dynamic study, where we would like to see the effect of the MPPT converter, how it is working. We would like to design a DC-DC converter, we would like to design an inverter, and there the transient part, there the dynamics are going to come into picture. But since the optimal sizing part is a steady state part, so there we don't worry about the dynamics much, but we are going to use a direct equation like this, where we have a nominal irradiation, and this is the rated value of irradiation, and you are going to multiply it with the rated power, and this is an additional factor, derating factor, and this is a temperature coefficient, and this is a temperature. So here you can see, and again this is also a factor which you can see, if the radiation is more, you are going to get more power when compared to the rated value. Just multiply the factor. The PVR is multiplied by a factor of 0.1, 0.2 up to 1. So right, so depending on the radiation, you are going to get the output here, and you are multiplying it with the FDR, so that is a derating factor. So that we are going to specifically include in the system, in order to avoid all these, in order to include the dynamics, in order to include these losses caused due to the sand or the shading, losses caused due to dust. So because when you are planning, we are going for a worst case, that let's say 20% of the energy whatever we are going to generate might not be available. So we are going to go for a worst case scenario, right? So we are assuming that the maximum power point system is in place. So in place of 1000 watts we are going to get, we assume that we get 800 watts only, so that is a fail-safe method of planning, right? So we just multiply the power whatever you are getting by a factor, let's say 85% or 80%, so that our planning is good, so that we don't suffer difficulty later. Once we set up the plant, we should not be facing these kind of problems, right? So now the wind system is modeled in this manner. So we have a mechanical power output of a wind turbine is like this, and CP, coefficient of power, is again different methods are there to model, and lambda is what is a tip speed ratio, which is omega m into R by VW, wind speed. So this is what, again, for the wind system also there is possibility of maximum power point. So by changing the tip speed ratio, the lambda value, by choosing a proper tip speed ratio, you can get a maximum power out of a wind turbine as well. So there is an MPPT possible for wind turbine as well. Again, in this case also we assume that these are the different methods which you can use to control the wind speed. MPPT of the wind turbine, tip speed ratio, optimal torque, power feedback, per turbine observer, pitch angle control. These are the methods which are used to for the MPPT in the wind system as well. So again, for a planning study or optimization study, we assume that these things are already there, and we typically are going to model only the wind turbine characteristics, right? So at what wind speed or the wind power is generated at what wind speed. So here this curve is kind of an exponential. So I take a linear model. So this is approximated linear model we can take for this exponential curve, and even there is an exponential equation as well. So both are not going to make much of the difference. You can go for the linear model, or you can go for this cubic model which we have. So again, this is a very simple equation. So if you have the wind speed data, if you just substitute, there is one speed which is called as a cut-in speed, there is one speed which is called as a rated speed, one speed which is called as cut-out speed. So that means what? This is a minimum wind speed which is required, then only the wind turbine can start generating power. So you will not be generating any wind power before cut-in speed. So generally it is, let's say, 3 meters per second wind speed is there. Before that, generally nobody is going to allow you to generate the power. So we'll start at 3 meters per second, and we are going to go up to rated speed, let's say maybe 10 or maybe 12, maybe 8, depending on the wind turbine. And then you're going to go up to cutout, you're going to generate a constant power. Even though the wind speed is varying, you're going to adjust the tip speed ratio, or you're going to adjust the pitch angle, yaw control, you apply any method, you are going to make your output power constant, because this thing P rated is going to be rated power of the generator, whatever we have on the wind turbine. So even though the wind speed is available is very high, so you cannot rotate at the wind turbine or the generator at very high speed, otherwise the generator is going to get damaged. So by using the gear mechanism or any other mechanism, we are going to make the power constant in this entire region. And definitely there is a cutout power, after which you are not supposed to rotate. That will damage the wind turbine blades, that will damage the rotating mechanism, gearbox, anything. So in case of storms, or in case of tufan or whatever it is, so there you have a huge velocity wind. So if you try to generate the power in the same wind, in that wind, huge winds, so definitely it is going to damage the wind turbine. So in that case, what they are going to do, simply they are going to point the wind turbine in the direction of wind, and just make it perpendicular to the wind direction. The blades are made perpendicular so that they are not going to rotate. The wind will directly pass through the wind turbine. So that way they are going to make the wind system safe, not safe from the damage. So this is a very simple equation. So you have one equation of PV here. So this equation you are supposed to model, and one equation of wind here. This equation you are supposed to model here. And then we have, let's say, battery system. So battery should also be modeled here. So we are going to, there are several methods of modeling a battery. So this method is the SOC method, where we have SOC of the next instant. SOC in the sense state of charge. So that is how much percent, what you get in your mobile phones, that what it shows how much percent battery we have, 20%, 30%, that is called as a state of charge. So at the moment, if you know the state of charge at present, and you want to find out a state of charge at the next instant, and provided you know how much current you are giving, so depending on the current you are supplying here, whether it is positive or negative, it will be decided whether it is battery charging or discharging. And so if you know those values, so substitute here, you can get an instant at after what the next instant, let's say 1 hour, how much the battery is going to be charged if you are charging the battery with this much I battery current. So other things are constant basically. So delta T is the time difference, how many, let's say it is hour, it may be 1 minute, it may be 10 minutes, it may be 1 hour, depending on how much time you want to check it. And voltage of the battery, sometimes it is modeled as a function of SOC directly if you have the state of charge data. So by if you are making the curve fitting experimental data, if you are able to curve fit the voltage to the SOC, so either only by using voltage of the battery also you can tell SOC, or by using SOC also you can tell the voltage of the battery. So both ways it can serve the purpose. And there is our internal model where you are going to model the resistance is a function of SOC and voltage also as a function of SOC like this. And based on the SOC of previous instant, you can just substitute I battery and this is a charge. Simply you can get the next state of charge. So there this requires again an experimental voltage curve, so that so if you know the at what SOC what will be the open circuit voltage. So those data can be generated by using the experimental setup, and you can model your R discharge and R charge in this manner. So once all these things are a function of SOC, so there is no need to measure them every time. Simply you can just substitute those values. So R internal, if you want, I bat, if you want, you can just find out like V minus IR here. So R value, you need not to go anywhere to find R value. Just simply look at the curve. So based on the state of charge right now, you can just take whether it is charging or discharging, you can take this resistance value directly from the experimental data. So you need not to do any calculation. Simply this can be a lookup table and you can just take directly from the curve here. And there is one more model of battery which is widely used, which is called as a kinetic battery model. So which assumes the battery as a two-tank system, where it will take one part as a bound energy, other part is available energy. So it will divide total charge into two parts. So one is the energy which is directly available. So this much energy is directly available because in the battery it is a chemical reaction, right? So you cannot get all the power. Let's say you have 600 ampere hours means, or into let's say some 12 volts, whatever the power you have, you cannot instantly draw that much power. So there is a limitation in the battery's point of view that energy must be converted from chemical process into electrical process. So that energy is going to be represented as a bound energy, and whatever the energy instantly you can draw, that can be represented as a the available energy. So this method is a more accurate method where you can get the power. Again, equations are here. So bound energy, available energy, you can calculate by using these equations. So these are all pretty just all are constants only. So you can refer to some of the. You can just type in Google kinetic battery model. You can get good papers in which these methods are highlighted. And you can, this advantage of this method is that it can give you the current, what is the maximum current and what is the maximum charging and discharge current at each instant the battery can give. So that will give the accurate value. So if maximum, at present the battery capacity may be more, but at maximum what it can give right now is what is more important than what it has for the entire duration, like what is the capacity of it, right? So this will give us the limits on the battery as well. Now once we have the models, now we can go for the meteorological data analysis. Now we have to see different data parts for, let's say, some papers, it might, some people have taken 2 years, some people have taken 30 years data for a clear understanding of the data patterns, because let's say you might say only 1 year is sufficient, but what happens in 1 year is typically if there is so much of rain in this year, let's say 3-4 months there was full of rain, so naturally if you take the data of this year, so that is not going to be representing the typical conditions there. So it will represent this year which has so much of rainfall, so the estimates are wrong. So for that reason we are going to go for a larger data sets, so that we can go for the accurate model. I need to just take a call, just give me a second please. Yeah, sorry for that interruption. There was some important call. Yeah. So yeah, all the participants there. Is it? Am I going too fast? Can somebody tell me if it is fine?
No, sir, it is fine. The speed is okay.
Yeah, it is audible. Like you can understand what
Yeah.
I'm speaking.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, fine, fine. So we are at yeah. Now again, if you go for very large data, then what is going to happen? The issue here is that you cannot analyze so much large data because of that. It is a cumbersome task because data points, let's say in a year, if you take hourly average data as well, that is going to cause 8,760 points per each data item. So if you go for 30 years, then it is going to be very, very huge. So in order to simplify that task, we can use the typical meteorological year where we can go for we can take a year, we can form an year by taking months from different years, so that will represent an average value where you can just see exact data pattern of that meteorological location. And you can go for worst month scenario, that you can design your system as per the worst month in which you don't have much of the PV, much of the wind available. So if you are able to survive in that month, definitely you will be surviving in all other months. So that can be done. And some people have done a typical day of the month as taken as a reference to that month, and you can group several days with similar data patterns into one day, and that way also you can reduce the requirement of data. So these are the part of meteorological analysis, and obviously you will be requiring a load data as well. So load, what load you are going to serve, so that load also going to dictate our how to size our optimal sizing system. Now this is a typical block diagram, you can say. So we have solar data, wind data, and PV model, wind model, battery model we have. So we are going to feed these data into these models, and we are going to check whether this, whatever the power we have generated in each hour is going to be serving the load. And we are going to see whether how much load we are able to meet and how much we are unable to meet, and how much power we are in excess, how much power we are dumping, how much power we are selling into grid, how much power we are drawing from the grid. So those are all the things we are going to take into consideration before development of this policy. And now some reliability indices also we are going to see. Naturally, when we talk about reliability, that this generally loss of power supply probability is what we are going to look into as a reliability index. So where we see that we are going to find out how many instances are there where we have the power which is we are supplying is less than the power demand. That means where we are unable to meet the power. So in a year, if you are analyzing, you are going to find out how many hours where we are unable to find out the supply to the load. So, and you are going to divide it by the total hours. So that is going to give us some value, let's say some factor which is less than 1, obviously. So let's say it is generally 0.05, 0.01. So we can choose the required reliability level. So we can decide whether this LPSP should be less than 0.1, less than 0.05, less than 0.001. Because of the factor, based on this factor, obviously the size of the system is going to vary. Because if you want to have power every time, 100% of the times, even in the worst conditions, then obviously you are going to have extra storage. You are going to have you are going to size your system a bit more so that the power is available in every instant. So this is going to dictate an important part where you can decide that how much, let's say I'm able to tolerate if in a month, let's say I have, let's say maybe few hours of power cut is fine with me, or then you can reduce the cost of the system a lot. If you are able to achieve that kind of a scenario by, if you are able to tolerate some power loss, so that small power loss hours that can compensate a large extent in a power scenario where, because it is a seesaw between cost and quality, you can say. So if you want a product with 95% of quality, then the cost of the product can be 50% of 100% quality paper product. So that extra cost which we need to incur to get that 5% additional quality will be very, very huge, right? So that is there in any manufacturing process, right? So that for that reason, if you are able to select some particular value of reliability index, then that will be definitely going to cause a very good reduction in the cost of the power generated. So Again, there is one more: loss of load probability, expected energy not supplied, deficiency in process probability. All are in a way represents the same thing. Each and every researcher has named it in a different fashion, but more or less the concept of the thing is going to be same. And now economic analysis we are supposed to do. We are supposed to do the initial investment cost analysis, then we are supposed to go for operation and maintenance and replacement cost. So all these managerial subjects which we study as a UG student, they are going to be helpful here, because as an engineer it should not be only technical part we should know, but we should know how the project management also, right? So if you don't know the financial analysis part, somebody can come and fool you directly easily. So you only know technical part and you are doing your job, but the management people can come and make you fool that this much cost, this is inflation, this is a interest. You don't know all those things, and you don't know net present value, you don't know inflation. So they can easily fool you and take your money, right? So that's why there are some management subjects which are involved in engineering in most of the universities. I think you also might be teaching the management courses for students, so that a student is not only capable with technical knowledge, but also capable with the economic analysis as well. Because whenever we are planning a project, we must be thinking in terms of the cost. And obviously any project you are going to pitch to somebody, definitely first criteria they are going to ask is what is the cost. Then only they will talk about whether the project is good, how much technicalities are there, how much technical stuff advancement you are going to do. Nobody is going to bother. That is the second thing. Let's say you are asking for some millions of dollars and you say some important invention I'm going to make, nobody is going to give, right? So depending on how efficiently you are able to make the product work, and that is entirely dependent on the cost of the system. So we are going to plan all these things: investment, operation and maintenance, depending on the solar panel capacity you are taking. So you know the cost of an individual solar panel, and then you are supposed to perform the cost analysis for every combination, and then we can find out what is the best possible combination, right? So how we are going to take the objective function, like that means what every optimization strategy is going to have a few important parts, which I'll be discussing in few minutes. So the main objective of the system is to bring the cost down to some reasonable value, right? So our objective will be what we are going to take total number of units whatever we are going to generate in a year or in an entire scenario, or let's say here I told annual. So in a year how many units you are going to generate, and in a year how much cost you are going to incur. So cost divided by the number of units is going to give us your levelized cost of energy. So this cost is going to include all these factors, right? Investment, operation, replacement, everything is included here, with the interest rate, with the inflation adjusted, everything is to come here. And once we have this cash flow yearly, then you should divide it by total energy what we are generating in a year. So that will give us the levelized cost of energy. So that should be competitive, right? That should be 3 rupees, that should be 2 rupees. Then your energy system is going to be called as a very efficient energy system. This your size, and that must be minimum possible. So every combination of PV, wind and battery can generate a different value of LCE. So we have to identify a better combination which will give us the minimum possible levelized cost of energy. And constraints, again every optimization function is going to have constraints here. So constraints which we are going to use in terms of a PV or wind are like this. So we have PV, we can go for a PV array capacity. Capacity directly indicates that how much area you want. So PV panels you want to set up, that if you have how much area, depending upon you can find out how many number of PV panels you can accommodate in that area. And you can even optimize put a constraint on the tilt angle. Area is directly related to capacity only, and you can have one more constraint called complementary characteristics. And wind capacity, wind area, installation height for the wind. Battery also, again state of charge, depth of discharge, number of cycles, charging, discharging power and rate. So these are the constraints which we are going to put on the battery system. Obviously if you maintain a very good state of charge, let's say between 30% to 90%, you are going to get a battery for longer duration. So let's say in a mobile also or in a laptop, always try to keep the charge between 90 to 30%, so that your battery comes longer. because if you go, if you discharge the battery deeply or below 30%, then it is going to take more time to charge, and the battery is going to lose its properties as you deeply discharge the battery every time. And if you overcharge, then again also the battery is going to from 90 to 100% also it takes more time to charge if you observe. So that is also not good sign for the battery. So always try to keep the charge between 90 to 100% so that you can get a better optimal utilization of the battery. And for environmental factors, that you can say how much pollution you are reducing and how socially acceptable. That means what? Wind panels, some people would not prefer to have that in nearby areas, like where it is going to generate sound. Wind panels are going to cause a lot of noise. So wind turbines, sorry, not panels. So again, social acceptability, such kind of factors also come into picture. And when you are integrating into grid, you are going to get fluctuations, you are going to get cost of extension of line, because naturally if the system is not connected to the grid, grid is not available nearly, so you are supposed to lay extra transmission line, so that is also going to cost. So that is also going to be included in the this part, grid integration part. Now let us talk about optimization a little bit. Now we understood, we developed the models. We have a PV, wind, battery model in our hand, and when we have the constraints, we have the objective function. Now let us talk how to optimize now, how to put everything together and how to get the better result out of the system. Like what is the process of optimization? So let us just keep that part aside. For now, let us understand what is optimization in a brief, and then we will combine these two together and see how it is going to work. So optimization is a process again of achieving the best out of anything by utilizing by putting some constraints or within the allowable boundaries, right? So let's say I have 100 rupees, and if I want to have so many things, and now we have to figure out that what is the objective of us. Let's say I want to make a house, I have 10 lakhs maximum. Now I have to see what is my objective is to minimize the cost of house, but I cannot. Minimum cost means zero cost. Zero cost is again not acceptable, obviously. So zero cost, we are not going to be there, because zero cost there is no home at all. So there will be a requirement. The room is going to have 2 rooms. The house is going to have 2 or 3 rooms, and it should be near to the city, or it should be at certain distance. It is possible I can go for 10 kilometers from the city, or I can go for a roof of a different type. I can go for asbestos, or I can go for sheet, or I can go for a slab, or I can make so many things. Interior design, paintings, everything you can. All these are constraints, right? So our objective is to minimize the constraint, and where you are satisfying all other constraints, minimize the cost by satisfying those constraints. So you can decide which area you would like to construct the house. So that based on that you are going to change the land rate and other things, and which type of material you are going to use. So that is also give us some cost based on the material. So you can optimize all those parameters so that the cost is within the limits, and it should be possible minimum. And let's say I can construct my cost by satisfying all the constraint at 7 lakhs. That is a much better solution than going for a 10 lakh, right? So, and here you have an equation. So this is basically 0.1 x square, not 1.0. So here this is a parabola, and if I asked you to find out the minimum here, what you are going to do? Simply you are going to go for minima and maxima. So just differentiate dy by dx, and you can find out 0.1 into x equal to 0, and x equal to 0 you are going to get at minimum. So, and how you find it is minimum? Just by double integration you can find out slope is positive, negative, thereby you can say it is minimum or maximum, right? So this everybody know. Now this is for a single slope problem where we have only one slope and we have an equation, there is no issue. But in a case where we have several local minimums, right? Then again, each interval you are going to perform this maxima, minima, or you are going to use your Newton-Raphson method is also there. So you can start from an initial guess, and you can just update the equation, and you can get to a minima or maxima. But those conventional methods are going to be faced in the problem when we have several local minimas. But because if your initial guess is here, by some chance you are definitely going to come here. But if your initial guess is here, here, or any other in this place, you are going to possibly end up at the local minimum only, not at the global minimum. right? So our aim is to identify the global minimum, not the local minimum. And for a 3D problem, you can see if the problem is differentiable, you can definitely go for minimum and maxima, or even go for a Newton-Raphson method. So this is a simple problem, spare, and again this is a maximum problem. And you can see some functions, test functions, where we have several local minimum and maximums for this kind of a system. This is also a 6 camel humpback problem. This is also having an equation. So if the problem has an equation, there could be a possibility of applying the conventional methods, and you can, by trial and error, you can find out a good initial guess, and you can find out the optimum value. But in practical cases, the problem surface is not defined. Let's say I want to find out the cost with respect to my PV panel, wind turbine, and the battery, or something like that. So at each and every combination, if you try to plot the graph, that graph doesn't have any shape at all. You don't know what the problem surface is. So for that reason, you will never be able to achieve the gradients, and you will never ever be able to apply the Newton-Raphson method or any other methods. So for that reason, you are going to go for this kind of approaches. You are going to use linear programming, graphic construction, probabilistic, iterative methods, and meta-heuristic algorithms. So each of these 4 methods have its own problems here. So the graphic construction method is suitable only for 2 variable problems, and probabilistic methods are not going to be giving us the dynamics of the system. It's only just based on the approximations. Iterative methods, again, they are just simple iterative methods where there is no improvement in the solution. Simply they iterate through the entire search space without making any less computational effort. That computational effort is going to be very huge in the iterative methods, and sometimes it is not even possible with the cascaded loops. If we have, then it is going to be the order of the computations will become some millions and millions number of computations it has to perform. So to solve these problems, we are going to use meta-heuristic algorithms. So let us see. So meta-heuristics, the definition is something like this. So it is defined as an iterative generation process which guides a subordinate heuristic by combining intelligently different concepts for exploring and exploiting the search space. Learning strategies are used to structure information in order to find efficiently near optimal solutions. So entire all the parts, whatever we are going to include in the overall this what we call optimization process, the definition combines everything together in a beautiful manner. That it is defined as an iterative generation process which guides a subordinate heuristic. So subordinate means which is not a good heuristic, but it is going to guide this subordinate heuristic into a better solution by exploring and exploiting. So exploring means it is going to explore the entire search space, and by exploiting means it is going to search effectively near the optimal solution. So that process is called exploitation. And learning strategies used to structure information in order to find efficiently near optimal solution. Again, this is also important. The solutions whatever we are going to get by using meta heuristics is always a near optimal solution. 100% optimality we cannot guarantee. That is only one of the problem in this meta heuristic algorithms right now. And what I told are here. So same thing, whatever is there, just a simple represented in a different manner. And some of the methods, single solution based methods, hill climbing, simulated tunneling, taboo search, genetic algorithm, particle swarm optimization, grey wolf, cuckoo, and so many. Even if you ask me, there are thousands of methods available for this kind of a system nowadays, this kind of algorithms. And now basically what are the major steps in this by using this these methods is this. First thing is we have to identify the decision variables. So let us now try to relate this problem to our optimization problem. So we have identified what are the decision variables. What are the decision variables? Are the number of PV panels, number of wind turbines, and number of the batteries. So these 3 are the decision variables in our problem. And define the search space. Search space means what? Define what is a boundary. How many number of maximum panels you can incorporate, how many number of maximum number of wind turbines you can incorporate, how many number of batteries you can incorporate based on the available area or other constraints. That will be higher boundary. Lower boundary, either it can be 1 or it can be
some minimum number, depending on again how many minimum you want to have, that also can be form a lower bound. So this is the subspace. That means what? PV panels should be varying from 100 to 1000. So that is what I have identified earlier. So that is my constraint on the PV panel. Wind turbines will vary from 1 to 10. So 10 wind turbines I can go. So from 1 to 10 I can put a variable limit on the wind turbine. Battery I have 1000, let's say 500 batteries I can put. So I can go between 100 to 500 or 200 to 500. Again battery, there is autonomy level requirement. So depending on the autonomy level you want, so you can decide the minimum battery space battery you want to have in your system. So those three things will give us the boundary on the subspace, right? And then form an objective function. Objective function we have already formed by using the cost analysis. I want to have the minimum cost out of my unit minimum per unit cost in my system. So that is my objective function. And constraints, again I want to have a reliable system. Let's say 95% of the reliability I want. So I can go for LPSP value should be less than 0.05. And I can go for any other constraints if I have on the grid or on the battery or any other constraints I can include in this, right? So now how the meta heuristic algorithms are going to work. So we are going to have a population here. We are going to, it's not a single solution. You are going to generate 50 combinations of solutions, and we are going to find out what is the objective function value for 50 combinations. And out of 50 combinations, like that is what is the fitness value. Out of those 50 combinations, you are going to identify what is the best search agent so far. And then depending on the position of the best search agent so far, you are going to change the positions of others. So remaining 49 will update their position based on the present best value, and then we are going to repeat the same process until you reach either at the maximum number of iterations are reached, or you have some tolerance. You said that I am okay if I get less than 2 rupees, that is fine for me, so I can go for less than 2 as my tolerance, right? So since we don't know what is the absolute minimum, so then we have to depend upon either the maximum number of iterations, or it is a user choice that I can go, I'm okay if this is less than certain value, that is also possible, right? So now let me just stop it here. I'll just try to show you a simulation of how the PSO works and how some of the algorithms work in this manner. So let me, is it visible, MATLAB screen?
No, sir, it is not visible.
Is it visible now?
No, sir.
No? I have shared it. Not visible?
Yeah, you when you click on the share, you share the screen, not window.
Yeah, okay. I'll share then. I'll share the screen. Yeah, it is visible now.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So let me just. I've taken some standard test function here with the limits. I think it should be fine. PSO clear one. Yeah. It is a particle swarm optimization. So I think most of you, or some of you at least, might have worked on the optimization algorithms earlier. So let me just quickly run and show you how exactly this process is going to take place. So usually we take a little bit of less number of population. I just taken large population so that I can show you that the particles are moving in the search space. So you can see the every iteration the objective function value is being decreased. From the beginning it was 5, it became 1, it became something less now. So it is still constant for now, not yet there is no decrement in this system as of now. So you can see this is the last 10 iterations. If there is, and because after some time it is going to become near 0, so it is not visible here. I put it here separately as well. So you can see this is the objective function value. This is the problem surface. And this problem has several local minimums. You can see all these the sharp things are the local minimums, and there is one global minimum here. So you can see the algorithm is currently searching in the entire search space. The positions of all the particles are being updated based on the best value which we have here. So you can slowly see more number of particles or search agents are started to form lumps in this region now. Previously they are all spread across the entire search space. Now slowly they are for coming into this cone region where you can see this is a minimum value possible. So you can just wait and see how all the particles are going to move towards the minimum value. So you can just observe. So slowly the upper portion has been removed from the search, because you can see the particles which are there in the upper portion, slowly they started to come down. So they are moving towards exploitation. Previously the first part was exploration, where the all particles were exploring the entire search space, and then they slowly now coming down into this near to this optimal value. Now present objective function value is about 0.0013 or even less than that. So you can see all are coming down now. So they are moving towards the best solution. So now you can see even all are coming towards the global optimum here. So you can see now exploration is being started to diminish completely. So all are coming down onto this local global minimum here. You can see I have taken exactly how many number of particles. So I have a population of 500. So all 500 are now nearly reaching all. They are ending up at the global minimum only. So now I would like to conclude here is that this kind of algorithms like particle swarm optimization or any swarm based methods, they are suitable for solving this kind of different difficult problems, because you can use by using mathematics. If you try to solve this problem for optimal value, it is very difficult. And this is a two variable problem, and the same can be extended to any number of variables. You can go for 3 dimension, 4 dimension, 5 dimension, even 30 dimension also. These methods are applicable. So now you can see all of them have reached the global minimum. So once you find all of them reached here, you can stop it, or you can you see all 500 iterations are over. My global best value I have achieved is 4 into 10 power minus 15. So this is absolutely almost near to 0 only, right? So even though if I change the minimum value from here to some other point, still I'll be able to get the same minimum value by using these algorithms. So I just wanted to show you that it is possible. These algorithms are going to work. So by using this kind of a graphical user interface, we can just make sure that this kind of algorithms, how they are going to work. And when you are developing new algorithms also, you can see how the algorithm dynamics are playing in picture, that how algorithm is behaving under different conditions you are going to put. Depending on that, how your algorithm is moving towards the better optimal solutions, right? And moreover, these are there are certain number of test functions available. You can verify your algorithm in the test functions before applying it to the other problems what you're going to solve in the real world. So thereby you can prove the efficacy of your algorithm, whether that algorithm is good enough to be put can be used for the global optimal, finding the global optimum solution of your problem. And several methods, there are several algorithms as I already listed before as well. So I tried to give some of the algorithms here. Particle swarm optimization was inspired from the movement of the bird flocks and fish flock and bird behavior. So how one bird which is moving in the front is going to guide other birds. So similarly PSO was developed. So the same, whatever I tried to explain earlier, all those characteristics are you are going to find out here as well. So there is nothing new here, only every algorithm talks in a different sense. So they will say they are going to be inspired by some nature, and at the end of the day, all of the algorithms has the key part is what you have to define the search space, you have to form the objective function, and then define the population, and then find out the objective function value, then find out the best value. Based on the best value, update the position of other values. So you go for any algorithm and you can see based on the position of the best value, this is the position of global best and this is a iterative best. So based on these two positions, all other values are subtracted here. So the all other values are going to be moved towards this XID is moved towards PGD. This XID again is trying to move towards the PID as well. So depending on the algorithms you are going to use, these equations might be varying a little bit, but most of the things are going to remain same. And now this difference velocity is going to be added to the position so that they are going to be moved. So likewise, you can see when you have seen the simulation there previously, the particles were all scarce in the entire search space. After some iterations, this velocity is being added every time. So by using those velocity, every particle is moving in this direction, PGD direction. So they are going to come and settle at the global best. So this is a flow chart for the same. And genetic algorithm again, it is one of the pioneering algorithm which was started in the year maybe in the 1980s. So this is a little bit different algorithm. This is not going to follow the, I mean, basic crust is same, but the mutations, all those things, how the positions are updated, that is a little bit difference here. So you can study genetic algorithm if you want. So there is one reproduction crossover mutation. This is just a process of replacing the present population with the new population, right? How you are going to replace is by using these these values, reproduction, crossover, and mutation, right? It is a basically concept of survival of fittest, where you are going to rank your population in the increasing order, and some of the worst performing population, let's say last 20%, last 30%, you're going to remove and you're going to create a new population from the best, and you're going to replace the older population with the newer population from the best solutions what we have right now. So these parents are going to give new children, those new children will form a new population. So likewise, every iteration there will be some of the worst population is removed and new population is added, and then again some of the worst population is removed. So that process is going to continue until you get all the values with there is no improvement in the further, there is no improvement. So you're going to get all the values same. Once you get all the values same, there is nothing best or nothing worst. So naturally you're going to end your loop. So that will be called as a population convergence in the genetic algorithm. And there is something called ant colony optimization, which is based on the ants behavior, how the ants are going to go to from nest to food. So you can see if there is no obstacle, the ants are moving in this straight line format. They are going to follow a single line. So if you see in your homes or anywhere, you see ants are going in lines from your one place to other place. They'll be forming a line. So how they are going to follow the line? Because one of the ants, whatever we are going to go, whenever the ant is going on a path, it is going to drop some chemical called pyramine. And the next ant which is coming is going to follow that chemical trail. So based on that chemical trail, it is going to follow the pyramid. And if there is an obstacle in the path, so they are going to go in this path. And some, let's say 50-50, they have divided 50% gone in this way, 50% gone in this way. Now what happened? After some time, they are going in this way and collecting the food, coming back to the nest like this. So the ones which have taken this path, are going to take more rounds than the ones which they have taken this path naturally, because there is longer duration, longer distance to cover. So the ants which went this way are going to take more time, and let's say these are ants are covering 10 rounds, these may cover only 5 rounds or maybe 7 rounds because of the larger distance. So that means what? Because of that, there will be large pyramid deposited in this path, there will be less pyramid deposited in this path after some time. So depending on the pyramid value, so then if a new ant comes in, it will try to follow the large, more pyramid which deposited in this way. I mean, which way has large deposit, it will try to follow the large ones. So after some time, they will stop following the smaller one. So as they follow the more strong pyramid deposit line, and there will be more ants moving this way, they will be having more and more pyramid. So definitely after some time, no ant will go this way, that will go this way only. Right? And now the same way you can that can be applied for this kind of a system pathfinding application. So where the same thing, same concept can be represented in this manner as well. And now if you just look at the optimization in the hybrid renewable energy system, so you can see annual weather data, load data, DG. So whatever I try to explain, again the same concept is here. So we have the output power from the system, and we have DL is just a constraint here. So whether that is fine, constraints are satisfied, you can incorporate constraints here, and based on the constraints you can accept, or you can just simply go back to the other solution. So m possible combinations we are generating here, and take one combination, calculate the power, calculate the economy, all the constraints you have, and then you see you go for the next combination like that. So there is no actual PSO or anything involved here, but if you, even though you have PSO, there will be an additional step only. So but more or less the flow chart is going to be something like this only, right? So this way we can optimize our hybrid systems by combining our mathematical models with the optimization algorithms, right? So you can choose for the grid connected standalone different modes, right? And you can find out the optimal combination at the end of this optimization process. And I would like to, before concluding, I'd like to give some insight into the PV technology industry. Presently, what is happening, theoretical part we all people will do, but practical aspects, how the practical aspects are going to work, what are the things, present challenges in the PV technology industry. So one of the challenge is the PV cost, as I was talking. One of the challenge is the cost of PV panels. So that thing should be there. Obviously, some material science, metrology people can work on new materials to improve the efficiency, reduce the cost and of the PV panels. And the other important aspect is PV panels have to be installed in a remote location. So sometimes there is theft, there is a theft of cable, theft of other equipment because of the remote locations. And you can see, and we have soiling, icing. Let's say you say we call it, we have a Thar desert in our country. So you can say Thar is a barren land. Anyhow, that is a wasteland only. So if you're, and there is enough sunlight on the desert naturally, so you can say you can put a PV panel there, PV system there, and we can send the power to the entire country. But the problem is there will be remote locations, there will be no water availability, and due to that frequent soiling is also going to happen in the desert locations, right? And how we are going to send the manpower there, how we are going to make the living for manpower, because there must be some people on the site, because they have to see the maintenance, they have to clean the panels, right? So several other issues are there. And in cold countries we have snow accumulation, such kind of issues are also there. And in, if you are going to go for up to the PV panels near the cement thermal related industry, again there will be dust soiling, because cement industry are going to generate large dust, right? So once you have a dust in the air, and that is definitely going to accumulate on the PV panel, and that is going to cause a lot of difficulty. I mean, the loss of efficiency that is going to cause. And now, what are the opportunities for the people who are working in the PV industry on the PV technologies? So first thing is we can develop PV cells with high efficiency. That is one of the area. And you can develop new type of modules where you can have better, hydrophobic surfaces where the less dust is going to be, accumulated on the panel, or other efficient materials you can use for the to avoid electrical losses as well, right? And you can work on efficient solar inverters. You can develop new type of inverters where we have good efficiency, and even fault tolerant condition converters also you can make, where you can have extra legs or some other fault tolerant mechanism. And this is one of the important area, health monitoring equipment of our PV module, because you can see sheer number of PV modules which we will be requiring. Let's say you have a PV system. For a 1 megawatt system, usually we have 4,000 PV panels, right? So 4,000 for 1 megawatt. Let us say you have 100 megawatt PV system. How many panels you are going to have? Let's say 4 lakh PV panels you are going to have. So 4 lakh PV panels, it is very, very difficult for a person to monitor individually one by one. That is an impossible task. So if we have some kind of mechanism, SCADA, or if we have some kind of health monitoring techniques, if we can develop, that is going to be a value addition to the system. So there people can definitely work on it. And people can work on the transformer technology. You can go for a solid state transformer, different other new innovations in the transformers as well. People can work on the cables which can be fault tolerant, which can be efficiently working in the different areas without faults. And you can work on protection switchgear. This is anyhow saturated area. And again, this is also one of the important parts, SCADA and IoT data loggers. This is also where one of the important area you can work on this, because these things, solar, the installations will be remote locations. If you are able to get the data into the cloud, and if you are able to operate all those things from the operating station in a city or somewhere, so there you can definitely improve the lifestyle or working environment. And so that can be one of the important area where people can work, and new technologies are required in this manner, in this area. And other auxiliaries, UPS, space heaters, lighting and HVAC for the local systems also can be used for the PV. And these, as I told you, these where I put star marks, these you can even for as you told, some of the UG students we have with us today. So you can work on developing a startup in this area. There is a huge scope, and what are the major advantage here is that you can go for it doesn't require so much of cost. So you can start with a limited investment, and you can develop modules, you can develop the technology, and then you can pitch it to some companies, and that can be commercialized, and that way you can earn revenue, and you can earn name, and you can even grow your company likewise. So this is an area where people can work. And the other area is that you can go for regular cleaning of solar panels is also difficult, because as I told you, 4 lakh PV panels, it is very, very difficult for a person. How many number of people are required? But without that, if you leave it like that only, but you are going to lose so much of energy, maybe 30%, 40% you are going to lose. So that is again a loss in the income, so which we don't want. So the PV panels must be regularly cleaned. And again, for that also people can develop technologies, robotic robots, which can automatically clean the PV panels after certain interval. So that technology can be also developed. And the other is diagnostic testing. This is testing for the low power production. So again, PV panels, so many PV panels are there. So if you are able to identify the areas where your PV problem is there, because if you are collectively looking at the system, everything seems to be fine, but your power output is low. But you have to identify which area, in which PV panel there is a problem, in which PV string there is a problem. So diagnostics in terms of inverter, diagnostic in transformer, diagnostic in PV module. So anywhere if you are able to diagnostic testing, again that is also an opportunity for the people to work in developing equipment. And you can go for IV curve tracing, possible again degraded modules. There will be definitely degraded modules. There will be some hotspots. So you can develop technology in IV curve tracing as well. You can develop instruments where you can monitor the IV curves so that you can isolate the faulty panels and replace them, so that there will be no loss incurred by the project handling company, right? And finally, you can go for a thermal imaging system as well, where this is also where there is hotspot formed. If some PV panel is getting heated so much, that means there is a problem with that panel. Either it is short circuited or there are some hotspot formed. So by using thermal imaging also, you can find out what is the state of health of a PV panel. So since we have to operate on a very large number of PV panels, this is one of the good area where you can thermally image the PV panels, and you can, based on the image processing, you can tell whether the PV panel is perfectly fine or there is some problem with the PV panel, and if it needs replacement or if it is fine, like that. So these are the opportunities for the people, and you can, for the faculty also, you can give students projects in this area, so that they can tell, and they can they can tell the same things in the interview if they work in this project. So there is a possibility that they'll be absorbed in the industries easily, that can be of better use to them. That's what I feel, and I think I'll end here. Thank you for your patient listening. So I hope I given you some Delta X contribution from my side to your existing knowledge. So if you have any doubts, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Mahesh sir. It was very nice session, very informative session regarding the what are the opportunities and all the things. There are a few questions posted by the participants on my WhatsApp group.
Yes,
So can I ask the question, sir?
yes, please.
By your permission.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is the best method for estimating SOC?
Best method, there are several methods. You can. Some people even use the Kalman filters. The Kalman filter actually gives a better SOC, but for the sizing study, too much accuracy is not required. If you get a reasonable accuracy, that is sufficient. You can go for some estimators based on Kalman filters, so they will give us a more pretty accurate value of your SOC.
There is one more question by the Mr. Santosh. Can I use the swarm intelligence and grasshopper optimization in hybrid
Yes.
energy management system?
Yeah,
How
definitely.
to design the constraints and objective function of?
Yeah, constraints and objective function is completely your choice. That there is no guidelines that you should go for that. Let's say your aim is to, let's say you are planning the system, then your aim is to reduce the cost, improve the reliability, right? So you can choose between either reliability as your constraint or your cost as a constraint, or you can form a hybrid optimization objective function by combining both with some weighted average method, right? So you can use any of those methods. So that is completely specific to the problem, specific to the person who is trying to optimize. So that is one way. Or energy management means you want to minimize the loss, you want to minimize the power outage. Then in that case, you are supposed to go for the reliability as your constraint, right? So depending on what your objective is, then you are supposed to choose according to that.
Okay, sir. Thank you. There is one more question from the Mankar sir. That is, which software is used to simulate the model other than the PSCAD and MATLAB?
Yeah, but any even if you ask me, if you want to go for open source, you can use Scilab. That is a very good software. Scilab, which is a popular worldwide. That is also open source software, so there is no need to buy it. MATLAB is actually a paid software. So for the people who would like to work, I suggest Scilab, and which the features of Scilab are almost the programming point of view. If you ask me, all the functions which are there in MATLAB, they are there in Scilab as well. So little bit change in the the syntax, but majority of the functions are available in Scilab. So I suggest you to go for Scilab, or you can go for Python, you can write Java. So even if you ask me, that is any programming language you can, because these are all simple equations only. So coding can be done in C language also, coding can be done in MATLAB, coding can be done in Java, PHP, .NET, or whatever the application you want to work with. So PHP.NET, they have their own applications, but C++ you can go for, even my suggestion is you can go for Scilab, or you can go for Python.
Thank you, Mahesh sir. Is it possible to use the GEMS also? Nowadays, the people are using the GEMS for for
GAMS
the
can also be
optimization.
used, but GAMS also can be used. Yes.
Okay, okay. So one of the question is that in this optimization of the hybrid renewable energy systems, what are the current open research area?
Open research areas, you can study the literature, but I'll give you because open research area means you can figure out what type of storage. I only talked about battery. You can go for different type of storage methods, and you can combine and find out what better storage method you would like to propose, and you can go for different types of reliability assessment, how you would like to go on. Let's say LPSP you would like to calculate, or you would like to go for some other method, critical period LPSP people use, and for a particular location, for a particular application, people write papers on. For different sources, not only PV, wind, battery, people combine other sources as well, diesel generator, fuel cell, all other sources, biomass, people combine different combinations. Likewise, you can try to use, and you can even by combining different algorithms with these different kinds of source, you can get good publications.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think there is one more software for economic analysis, that is a Homer.
Yeah,
Okay,
Homer
so
is there. Yes, yes.
I have used
Again,
for my MBA.
yes.
I have used for my MBA project. So I would like to suggest that Homer is also one of the good software. You
Yes,
can
yes.
refer that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Homer is like even graphical user interface is also there in
Yes.
Homer.
Yes. Yes.
But
Yes.
previously it used to be a free software, but now again it became a paid software. So my suggestion is a Homer, you don't get much of the feel of actual things which are going inside. So my suggestion is you
Yes.
can
Yes.
code. So coding is more better, and you have full control of the system. Homer means again there are fixed things, and you'll just select those sources, select those constraints, and you just simply run the simulation. So it is not possible for the optimization hybrid algorithms to be put into that, right? So
Yes. It is
yeah,
for undergraduate. It is okay.
yeah, Homer can be used for a starting, but what I prefer is writing the code is much more better way, what I feel.
Okay. Uh, So thank you. With this, I would like to thank Dr. Mahesh sir for giving us such wonderful, nice session. We have always associations with the SVNIT Surat. Many of our staff member is doing the PhD over there,
Okay,
and
okay,
our students is also doing the PhD at your research center. Okay,
okay,
so our association with the your SVNIT is always there. I have also visited through one of the STTP organized by Dr. Rakesh sir. Okay,
okay.
so thank you, sir, for giving such wonderful, nice session on the behalf of Department of Electrical Engineering, KKWAM Institute of Engineering Education and Research, Nashik. I would like to thank the Mahesh sir for such wonderful sessions. Again, and again, what are the research, open research area, how we can proceed with the UG and PG students? That guidelines is also very much suitable, sir. Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. So I hope everybody got some points from the. I don't know. I don't expect every time you understand everything whatever I speak, but if you get some delta X or some new direction from whatever I taught, that would be much. My purpose is solved. That's what I feel.
Yes, sir, definitely, definitely. That is the takeout at home. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Shall I end the session, sir?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay, okay.